Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me this morning. This is our monthly webinar from the 81st Training Sports Squadron. Good morning. Hello, Holly. About rubrics. Just real quick, some housekeeping for you. If you are not familiar with DCS, over on the left-hand side of your screen, you will see your name and you should see like a little smiley face. When you click the smiley face, this is where you can make yourself happy, sad, confused. You could also give me a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or clap. So this is just where this is a good way for you to, thank you, Michael, to connect with me and to collaborate. And so you know as well if you use DCS itself, that's there. And then also on the right-hand side is the chat function. So I really encourage you throughout the webinar that you use the chat function. If you have any questions, you can put those in the chat. And then also, if you want to share any information as well, you can go ahead and use the chat function there. Before we get started, I want to ask you a few questions. And these are just rhetorical questions, so you don't actually have to answer them in the chat. But think to yourself, do you ever feel like your students often misunderstand the assignments that you give them? Or are you worried sometimes that one student is being graded differently than another? Or do you have students that often try to debate their grades? Or possibly do you or your coworkers sort of complain about spending way too much time with grading? If you've answered yes to any or all questions, then a rubric might need to be in your life, or the rubrics that you currently have could be working against you rather than for you. We're going to take some time to talk about what exactly is a rubric, some advantages and disadvantages of a rubric. We'll go into the anatomy of the rubric and the different parts and why they're important. Then some different types that you will find. Of course, there are many different types of rubrics. These are just four that are the most commonly used. And finally, I will show you some rubric generator websites that will help you in your rubric making journeys, and finally some different resources as well that can help you. Of course, I am not a rubric expert, so please, if you have any information, tips, tricks, stories, websites, resources, please feel free to share them with everyone else in the chat because I love learning new things as well. Before we get started, though, I want you to meet the team. This is our online learning development team here at Faculty Development. I am Miss Brittney Hall. I am one of the IDLE instructors here. I've been here for almost 3 years. I don't teach IDLE alone, though. I have Mr. Frank Rosenkrantz over there to my side to help me out. He will be in the chat answering any questions that you may have. And then finally, we have Miss Monica Garcia, who is our online course director, and she will also be in the chat. They just said hello, and she'll be answering any questions that you might have as well or adding any information. So we are here for you. What is exactly a rubric? So what a rubric is, it's a scoring tool that you can use. It should and will identify different types of criteria that are relevant to an assignment or whatever learning outcome student that you want the students to do. That's very important that what your rubric has in it is relevant to the assignment, because I have seen some rubrics that have descriptions in them that have nothing to do with the assignment. So very clear that whatever criteria you have, it is relevant to an assignment that you are going to be grading. And then it clearly states all of the possible levels of achievement along a continuum. So usually you will have excellent or acceptable, meet standards, whatever the case may be, it will be along a continuum. Rubrics, when you normally hear of the word rubric, possibly your brain might go into the online classroom, which you're right, because in the online environment, you use a bunch of non-traditional assessments and strategies to assess your students. For example, you use threaded discussions, you use blogs, journals, might have them doing a wiki project. So these are all non-traditional or varied assessment types that you're using. And because of that, you now require a unique scoring or evaluation system that will truly measure that learner's performance. But you can also use a rubric in a traditional classroom. So I don't want you to think, oh, well, I don't teach online, so a rubric, it's not going to work for me. You can also use a rubric if you're teaching a physical skill, or if you're teaching a student how to use equipment, or any type of oral communication they have to do, any constructed objects, or if they do have to do a written essay or a paper or whatnot. I know I taught in the classroom and we had to do flight plans. So we could definitely have a rubric in teaching flight plans. So please don't think that this isn't for you if you're teaching in a classroom. It very well, you can use a rubric. Just like, the Air Force, we always have our things, and the Form 98 always comes to my mind. And I get this question a lot of, well, what's the difference between a rubric and a checklist? Said rubrics, they are given usually to the student before the project has even started. When a student gets a rubric, they should be able to read it and they will clearly know how their work will be evaluated. This is what I have to do to pass. If I don't, then I'm not going to pass. They also detailed explanations of what, again, will constitute as excellence and what will not. And also, a thoroughly designed rubric could include some real world examples. Sometimes I've seen them a lot is that you will give the students the rubric beforehand, and then you can also give them an example of an exemplary product. This is what you should shoot for. This is what your product should look like. So that's with the rubric. Now a checklist, it's still a set of criteria, but it's usually not used for evaluation. An example would be if you have the students that they have a final project and let's just say that they have to write a research report. You could give them a checklist that would have making sure that the student has the title page, the report, a map, a table, and a bibliography. This is something that the students can go ahead and check off, take a look and make sure that they have so they can understand that, okay, I need to have these things to fulfill all the requirements of that assignment. But I don't necessarily know how I'm going to be evaluated on this assignment by using a checklist. Checklist is you can sort of think of it like a light switch. It's either on or off. It's as simple as that. Where a rubric, you have a little more flow and more information. Some advantages of a rubric, and there are many, but they do and can save time with grading. When you are using a rubric, what is really great about it is that once you develop a good rubric, it's really using it's a cinch. You can read the student's assignment. You really don't even have to know their name or any personal information for that fact, but you just read an assignment. You take the elements, see if it matches up with the elements of the rubric, circle it, make some notes, and give them a grade. So if it is developed correctly, it can really save you a lot of time. It also provides a set of guidelines for grading. This leaves out the judging, honestly, with instructors. And, I've done it. You start reading a student's assignment or whatever it is they're doing, and the first couple sentences you start judging. And you're like, oh, this isn't going right. A rubric forces you to continue throughout the assignment and really make sure you adhere to those guidelines for grading. It also can assist for course developers to develop any content based on clarity of criterion. What that means is that if you notice a certain part of the rubric, students are always not hitting the mark or missing the mark, they're always being marked down. This could be because the material in your course just isn't hitting the mark, so to speak, and you might need to add more into your course, or your instructors might need to concentrate on that information or that area more. So this can really help everybody involved with the material in your course and development as well. The biggest and probably the hardest thing about making rubrics is making sure that it's objective. And it can be more objective than just a simple grading scale. And the huge advantage of rubrics is that they you do have the ability to record grades objectively. So like I said before, with a rubric, you don't have to know the student's name. You don't have to know any of their personal information. All you have to do is grade it and turn it in and give the student their grade. But it's very hard to write the subjectivity out of a rubric. So that's probably the biggest hurdle see with writing a good rubric is making sure that it is objective. And then finally, is it can provide students with opportunities to self-evaluate prior to submitting the assignments. Unlike the traditional classroom where we we don't tell anything what's on the test. Usually in the online environment, you're giving them a rubric and they know exactly what they're being graded on. So it's really a good tool for students to be able to look at the rubric and then they can see, oh, am I hitting the mark or am I going to miss the mark? And they can also be used in peer evaluation as well, which is another great assignment. Lots of advantages, but there are some disadvantages. One of them is it can discourage creativity. You have an assignment or you're in a class where creativity is key and you don't want to hinder your students' creativity, then using a rubric might not be the best for you because students will see what it is that they have to do on the rubric and they will only stick to that because they'll be afraid that they will miss the mark or be scored down because they didn't do exactly what was on the rubric. Also, time. It takes time to develop a rubric. My recommendation when you're making rubrics is to date them because you will have probably like 15 different versions of your rubric. We do in the IDLE course. We are constantly going in and fixing them, updating them because you quickly realize you'll write a rubric and you'll do a class and you'll be like, oh my gosh, that's awful. We have to redo this. And just this last class, we noticed something that we haven't noticed ever. So it's just something that they take time to develop. An objective rubric takes time to develop. It's very important that you get help of your coworkers to read it and to analyze it with you because that will help to make sure that it is objective. Next is it can cause confusion. So if you do have a poorly developed rubric, it can be really confusing not only for the teachers that are using it, but also for the students. So you want to make sure that you get away from, inconsistent language, any vague language. You don't want to use that like always or usually. You want to get rid of those words because it's just people don't know what you're talking about. It can change from one person to the other. Inconsistent language, for example, you could have different levels. Level 1, you could say, it describes a paper with incorrect citations. The next one is sometimes accurate citations. The next is many correct citations, and then complete citations. You're all over the place. There's just too many words and it's confusing. The right way or a better way to write that would be a paper with all correct citations. And then the next one would be 1 to 2 correct, 3 to 4 to correct, more than 4 correct. So that would be a way. Just make sure your language is consistent so it cuts out on that confusion as well. Next, we're going to start talking about the anatomy of a rubric. And the first part of a rubric is the task description. And I saw somebody Monica wrote in the chat that it helps to align it with the assignment instructions. And this is what your task description is. And it's very important that whatever it is you want the students to do, you explain that very thoroughly and detailed in your task description because your rubric is going to be grading that task description. For example, if you want the students to write about how to conduct an airfield lighting inspection using the proper AFIs and regulations, and they have to respond to 2 peers, then you need to make sure that everything else that they actually explain that they use the regulations and they respond to 2 peers. your task description is not an objective. It's not a one-line word. You're being very detailed with what it is you want that student to do. Sometimes I mean, my task descriptions for my class can get quite, in depth because they want to make sure you know exactly what it is that you want the student to do. So that's the first area that you can see could get a little shady, so to speak. You want to make sure you're able to communicate what it is you want them to do through writing. The next, you have the scale, and this is where the students will have a score. So with the scale, some teachers might want to use an A through an F. Some might use a scale 1 through 5. Others might choose to use words like excellent, competent, or needs work. It doesn't matter what you put on your scale, but the scale will let the students know where they are at along that continuum. Then you have your dimensions, and your dimensions are what you're actually going to be grading the students on. And then finally, you have the descriptions, which that outlines what a student needs to do to get a certain score along that certain dimension. Let's take a look here at what it actually looks like. Here you can see this is your anatomy of a rubric. You first have your scale or levels, and that's at the top. Now this example, all it has is numbers, which is fine, but you really want to try to get away from extreme scales. Scales, they can quickly become ineffective when you have too many options or too few options. So for example, a scale from 1 to 20, it's going to make the job on the instructor a lot harder to justify small differences, such as, okay, what's a 13 rather than a 14? It just becomes too difficult. Having 3 to 5 on a scale is more effective, and usually they say what's ideal is 4. Again, it's not set in stone. That's just, what you found. With that, that's your scale. And when you are talking about your scale and you want to use language, you want to stay away from negative language because it can discourage your students. And I know probably a lot of you are like, oh my gosh, really? Yes, I know. Try not to say words like none or never or, you fail or not even close because again, you're going to discourage your students. So maybe try using, less discouraging words like slightly or seldom. If that's at the end of the day, we are all educators. We have to connect to our students. And if that means I don't use never and I use seldom, then that's what I'm going to do. Next, on the left-hand side of your screen, you have your dimensions and categories. So that is what you will be looking for in the assignment. This one has content, graphics and visuals, and references. Usually if it's a written assignment, you'll have some type of grammar because it's very important that your students can, like I said before, express themselves through written ways. I know there's times I've read assignments where I've had to read them 6 or 7 times to understand what it is the student is trying to get across. So that's very important in written assignments, that grammar and sentence structure and things like that are important. And then finally, you have your descriptions, and those are based on the scale and category. And this is where you tell the students exactly what they need to do in order to get that level or points. Now, as you can see, as I went through all of these, you can quickly already start to see how a rubric could be super clear and helpful, or it can be very murky and frustrating. So this is why rubrics take time to develop, and they're, they can be difficult to keep them objective. I'm going to pause here for just a second and ask you if you have any questions so far. I know we went through a lot. Does anyone have any questions? I'll just pause for a few minutes. If you don't, you can grab a drink of water or some coffee or something. But does anyone have any questions? If so, you can talk or write them in the chat. Thing to say? Thank you, Monica, for your chat. Are any of you currently using rubrics? And thumbs up, smiley face, mad face, thumbs down. Hey, we got two people. No, I've used them a lot in school, and we use them for the idle course, and they do help a lot. Yes, horse fighter. Good. Do they help you, Anna? Written well, they help. Okay. Oh, thank you, Guy, for reminding me. Yes, there's the download option for the slides. If you look in the middle of your screen, there's a little paper with a arrow that's pointing down. So you can just hit that button and you can download the presentation. I made that available for you, so you can just go ahead and take them. Hopefully your rubrics will cut down on the bias of the instructor, but then if they're, it's hard to keep them objective. You're welcome. I would say no, Gordon, there really isn't any difference just as long as your rubric is, up lined up against that task description of your task. But usually, honestly, rubrics are primarily used for performance-based assessments because you are grading someone's performance on something. Um, at the beginning of the webinar, I mentioned that it's just not on in the online environment, but also you could use them in the classroom as well. If you are grading a student on how they're putting together something, they could be writing a paper, whatever the case may be, giving a speech. In Yes, it's usually they are doing something and you have to grade them on that. It's not a 30 question test. Let me put the bubble sheet on top and you're done. That's a great question. I really appreciate the questions and I'm going to keep on going about the different types of rubrics. And again, if you do a Google, you will see that there are a lot of different types of rubrics out there. And I'm just going to go over 4 of them with you. And you can decide which one is right for you. Apologize, this slide has a lot of writing on it, but I did that because hopefully you'll download it and then you can take it with you. But for the 4 different types of rubrics, we first have the analytic. So your analytic rubric is probably your most uh, the one that's used the most. It's the most popular one because it breaks down the characteristics of your assignment into different parts. And what this allows the instructor to do is it can really pinpoint exactly where that student is strong and then which areas that the student needs improvement. Next, you have 2 rubrics that are subsets of the analytic, and those are the developmental and your single point. Your developmental rubric, really, you aren't evaluating anything, so to speak. You're not evaluating a product or a performance. What you will be doing with your developmental rubric is you want to answer the question, to what extent are students that are doing this program or in our class able to do the skill or ability or whatever the case may be. And an example of that is I actually had to do one for my school and started out, they gave us a rubric and we had to rate ourselves. Mine was for education, so they asked us a bunch of questions like, how familiar are you with the code of ethics? Well, of course, I just started. I'm not familiar at all. I have no idea. So I rated myself a 1 because that's not happening. Then we redid it in the middle of our program, and I felt a little better. I was like a 3. I'm like, yeah, I know the code of ethics, da da da. And then now I just did it again at the end, and I'm like 5s all the way across. But, well, I like to think so, but that's okay. But still, I learned a lot. And that's what's great about a developmental rubric is you're not necessarily, giving them an assignment and grading it, but I'm telling you, just for your students and yourself to see the growth through your program, they are going to leave your course feeling like they've learned something. You want to know why? Because they're going to see it on the paper. They're going to see from the beginning where they marked they were a 1. Now, when they read down all the dimensions, they're going to understand every single dimension, where when they first did it, they didn't understand everything. So it's a really powerful tool, a developmental rubric. If you have time to create one for your courses, you can really, really connect with the students that way. Next, you have your single point rubric. And again, this is a lot like an analytic rubric because it does break down the components of your assignment into different criteria. But the difference is it only describes the criteria for proficiency. So what is the standard? That's all you see. The other areas are blank. And I'll show you an example here in just a second. And finally is your holistic rubric. It's the most general kind, and usually, again, it has your 3 to 5 levels of performance, but it's usually a broad description of characteristics that define each level. Here's an example of an analytic rubric, and as you can see, you have your scale, which is on the top, so beginning, developing, accomplished, and exemplary. In your head, when you are trying to think of your scale, when you are reading someone's assignment or looking at their product or whatever the case may be, well, as you're reading it or as you're watching them and you keep telling yourself, wow, that's great. Wow, that's awesome. Wow, that was a good sentence. That's an exemplary. That should be a 4. If you are saying, yes, that's good, or that's a great idea, and you're telling yourself, yes, that's a 3, an accomplished. A level 2, you're more thinking in your head, okay, you're on the right track, but that's a level 2. And then level 1, if you're thinking in your head, no, you totally missed the mark, but it's okay. You as the instructor then have to make some type of a decision about some type of appropriate intervention that you would need to do with that student. So either you just fail them completely, let them redo the assignment, which thankfully a couple of my teachers have let me do, um, whatever the case may be. So as you're grading, that's how you should be thinking in your head as you're grading. But as you can see for this breakfast in bed analytic rubric, it breaks it down into food, presentation, and comfort, and the learner can tell exactly where they were strong and where they need improvement. And as you can see already, if I just circle for food a 4, I'm already giving a lot of feedback to the student if written correctly. Some benefits of an analytic rubric is, again, it's that main thing about it gives the students exact and precise feedback. You want to use an analytic rubric when you have several instructors that are collectively assessing the student's work. So this is when you want to use an analytic rubric. Also, if you have any like outside people that will be examining the scores, you want to make sure you use an analytic rubric because you can give substantial feedback to the students. And also, it's great because you can give the profiles of specific strengths and weaknesses as well. Some disadvantages of your analytic rubric is it takes longer to grade with because you really have to be specific. You have to go in and really with a fine-tooth comb look at their assignment and make sure that you're hitting the mark with all of your scale and your descriptor. Next, we have holistic. Now, a holistic rubric you can see looks a lot different. This is the same breakfast in bed. However, you can see food, comfort, and presentation is all in lumped into one. You will use a holistic rubric when you just need an overall sense that the student gets it. This is where you would use if there's just no single correct answer or a response to a task. Okay, this isn't like A, B, C, or D. It's just usually you use these with, essays or where you just an overall quality of that proficiency or the student's work or understanding of what it is that you are teaching them. Usually, holistic rubrics are done at the end of the course. It's usually some type of summative assignment that you would use a holistic rubric. Also, if you are in the point or in the situation that you have to assess a significant number of assignments, you want to do the holistic rubric because it is very quick to grade. You don't have a lot of time to go through each assignment with a fine-tooth comb. Grab your holistic rubric and read it. Do they get it? Good. Okay, you get a 3, 4, whatever the case may be. A little less in depth. You can label it however you would like, but this, again, this is where you just need an overall assessment of the student. Next, we have our single point rubric, and this is where I was saying that you only have the standard in the middle. So this is, as if you can remember, this is actually the same as the column 3 on the analytic rubric. This is what the student needs just to meet the standard. And with the single point rubric, what is nice about this is it gives you lots of room to write in feedback. As you can see, the analytic rubric is already jam-packed with a lot of stuff. So you as the instructor, if you have to go in, and you'll start to notice that you'll find students sort of, adding things or doing things that aren't on that rubric and you have to write, it sort of gets a little frustrating and messy. The nice thing with a single point rubric is you don't really have to predict like all the ways the student might go wrong. You can just simply, you have the standard. If you meet the standard, great, you can circle it. If you have areas that need work, you can go ahead and write on the left-hand column. And then if they did really good in an area, you can write feedback as well. This is a really good rubric to use. Remember I said one disadvantage about rubrics is sometimes tends to hinder creativity. Well, using a single point rubric, this is a great way not to do that. This is where your students, it's a lot less words, so they're more likely to actually read the whole thing. And they read, oh, this is what I have to do to pass? Okay, but then the sky's the limit. There aren't any restrictions on them, so to speak. So that's one big advantage about a single point rubric. And then finally, you have your developmental rubric, and this is again, you're not using this to evaluate any work, but you're more just evaluating how they are moving throughout the process. So again, this could be a really great tool to use for course developers as well, and for your students for self-evaluation, because that is one thing that rubrics are used for, is self-evaluation as well. And for developmental rubrics, though, just one disadvantage is they are a little more difficult to design conceptually because there's just a close tie between assessment criteria and then the theory of development. But really, a developmental rubric, if it's designed correctly, it can be a very powerful tool. All right, so that I went briefly over just a couple of rubrics, and of course, you can decide which one would work best for you. And hopefully you can download the slides. And if you have any questions, you can please feel free to reach out to any of us. We'll be happy to help you. Let's go into some different types of rubric generators. There's two websites here that I have, and I'm going to go ahead and these will really help you because remember what I said about the whole subjectivity in rubrics, and that's the hardest to get out. Well, rubric is a 26 cell analytic rubric with, 2,000 words. These generators will help you. Almost there. Got the wall popping up any second now. All right. Everybody see my screen. You hear me? You hear me? Sure can. Okay. Okay. Okay, good. Thanks. So here is a website called Rubistar. We actually use this in the IDLE course because it's a really great tool. In Rubistar, there's a couple of ways that you can use it to help you create your rubric. One way is you can go down here to create a rubric, and just for an example, I'm going to click writing. You can use any type of product you want, but let's just do persuasive essay, for example. You can fill up all this top information if you want. If you do, then it'll let you actually download the rubric. Just an FYI, the website, it expires after 40 minutes, so it's done it to me. It'll erase everything. It'll just disappear. And so just be mindful of that. After 40 minutes, you're going to lose everything. As you scroll down, you can see that because I chose a persuasive essay, when I click the under the category, and of course, every rubric has different names for things. But here you can go ahead and this gives you a really good idea of what categories or dimensions you could assess your learners on. Let's just sentence structure for. And as you can see, it'll already auto-populate the cells for you, the descriptors. And you can see all sentences are well constructed, most sentences, most sentences, most sentences. Well, does anybody see a problem with this? Write in the chat. Let me ask you a question. Just how many are most sentences for you? How many would you think most are? No one wants to talk to me? How many are most sentences? Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. More than a few? Yeah. Right, it's subjective. It could be different for anyone. I want to say three. Most times you get a bunch of different answers. So you want to try to stay away from those vague terms like I mentioned before. Most, I don't know how many most are. My most could be different from your most. So very important that you stay away. But at least you have the building blocks here. You can go in and write 1 to 2, all, or more than 4, whatever the case may be, you can quantify that. And you have a position statement. The position statement was clear. Example. So this is a good tool to get you started with your rubric verbiage. Another website, it's not as in-depth as Rubistar, but it's quickrubric.com, and you simply just click the button, create a rubric, and it'll just bring you up a nice little chart here, and you can edit all of this. And you can save your rubric as well. So here, again, you can move your criteria to the top and bottom, title it, make sure you give it a date so you know what version you're on as well. So this is a good site as well. You can edit that. Back to Rubistar, another way that you can take a look at rubrics is find a rubric. Once you click find a rubric, you can type in any type of, so I'll just type in threaded discussion and it'll take a second. But it will do is it'll search and it'll pop up a bunch of different rubrics that are already made according to whatever keyword it is that you typed in there. So let's just pick the first one. Have anything, but that's what it will look like. I think there's like, what, 31 pages, 304 rubrics that you can take a look at, and it'll help you. And finally, we have our resource center. So all of this information will be located on our Faculty Development Learning Innovation Resource Center. I have the website there for you, so I really encourage you to take a look and check it out. We have a lot of great information on that site that you can use, especially in the times that we're in with COVID-19 and a lot of courses being moved online. We have a lot of great information there that will help you out. And that's all I have this morning for you, and I really appreciate you joining me. Thank you. And if you would like to present a topic of your choice and do one of our webinars, please reach out to Miss Monica Garcia to get on the schedule. We would love to have you. I love learning new things. It doesn't have to be about online learning or any of that, really. Whatever you know and you think people would be interested in, go ahead and create a webinar. We'd love to log in. So happy rubric making, everyone. I'll stay on for a little bit if you have any questions or you want to chat, but other than that, enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good weekend. Bye.